Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for September the 18th. Today, we are reading together the first couple of chapters of Second Kings. We are making our way through the divided kingdom era of Israel's history. And at the end of chapter 22 of First Kings, we see those on the throne being King Ahaziah of Israel and King Jehoram of Judah. Now we're going to have an issue, not really an issue, but a bit of a difficulty here in a little bit. We're going to see another Jehoram or Joram. There is some I don't know, just the guys know my different things within the text, within the various texts. We're going to see, I guess he has a couple different names, whatever it is. There's going to be a Jehoram in one place and a Jehoram in another place. So we'll do our very best to try to keep everything squared away and not get too confused in the story here. But we're going to see the end of Ahaziah and some foolishness on his part. And then we're going to see in chapter 2 today, the taking up of Elijah from the earth. Remember, all the way back in the First Kings text, he was really depressed, wanted to die, and yet God is not going to allow him to die. He's just going to take him up straight to the heavens, and we'll notice that here in chapter 2. So let me get the text up on the screen for us of 2 Kings chapter 1 and 2 Kings chapter 2, and we'll read along together today. Hope that your Monday is going good so far. Thanks for taking some time to read along with me today. 2 Kings chapter 1, verse number 1. After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Ahaziah had fallen through the latticed window of his upstairs room in Samaria and was injured. So he sent messengers instructing them, "Go, inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I will recover from this injury." But the angel of Yahweh said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Go and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and say to them, is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore, this is what Yahweh says, you will not get up from your sick bed, you will certainly die." Then Elijah left. The messengers returned to the king, who asked them, "Why have you come back?" And they replied, "A man came to meet us and said, go back to the king who sent you and declare to him, this is what Yahweh says, is it because there is no God in Israel that you're sending these men to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore, you will not get up from your sickbed, you will certainly die." The king asked them, "What sort of man came up to you and spoke those words to you?" And they replied, "A hairy man with a leather belt around his waist." He said, "It's Elijah the Tishbite." So King Ahaziah sent a captain with 50 men to Elijah. When the captain went up to him, he was sitting on top of the hill. He announced, "Man of God," the king declares, "come down." Elijah responded to the captain, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Then the fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. So the king sent another captain with his 50 men to Elijah. He took in the situation and announced, "Man of God, this is what the king says, come down immediately." Elijah responded, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. So divine fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. Then the king sent a third captain with his 50 men. The third captain went up and fell on his knees in front of Elijah and begged him, "Man of God, please let my life and the lives of these 50 servants of yours be precious to you. I have already already fire has come down from heaven and consumed the first two captains and their companions, but this time let my life be precious to you." The angel of Yahweh said to Elijah, "Go down with him. Don't be afraid of him." So he got up and went down with him to the king. Then Elijah said to King Ahaziah, "This is what Yahweh says, because you have sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, is it because there is no God in Israel for you to inquire of his will? You will not get up from your sickbed, you will certainly die." Ahaziah died according to the word of Yahweh that Elijah had spoken. Since he had no son, Joram became king in his place. This happened in the second year of Judah's king Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat. The rest of the events of Ahaziah's reign, along with his accomplishments, are written in the historical record of Israel's kings. Chapter 2, the time had come for Yahweh to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah and Elisha were traveling from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. Yahweh is sending me on to Bethel." But Elisha replied, "As Yahweh lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Then the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said, "Do you know that Yahweh will take your master away from you today?" He said, "Yes, I know. Be quiet." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here. Yahweh is sending me to Jericho." But Elisha said, "As Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. Then the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho came up to Elisha and said, "Do you know that Yahweh will take your master away from you today?" He said, "Yes, I know. Be quiet." Elijah said to him, "Stay here. Yahweh is sending me to the Jordan." But Elisha said, "As Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men from the sons of the prophets came and stood observing them at a distance while the two of them stood by the Jordan. Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the water, which parted to the right and the left. Then the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha answered, "Please let me inherit 2 shares of your spirit." Elisha replied, "You have asked for something difficult. If you see me being taken from you, you will have it. If not, you won't." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire with horses of fire suddenly appeared and separated the two of them. Then Elijah went up into heaven in the whirlwind. As Elisha watched, he kept crying out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." When he could no longer see him, he took hold of his own clothes, tore them in two, picked up the mantle that had fallen off Elijah, and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle Elijah had dropped, and he struck the water. "Where is Yahweh God of Elijah?" he asked. He struck the water himself, and it parted to the right and the left, and Elisha crossed over. When the sons of the prophets from Jericho who were observing saw him, they said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." They came to meet him and bowed down to the ground in front of him. Then the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Since there are 50 strong men here with your servants, please let them go and search for your master. Maybe the spirit of Yahweh has carried him away and put him on one of the mountains or into one of the valleys." But he answered, "Don't send them." However, they urged him to the point of embarrassment. So he said, "Send them." They sent 50 men who looked for 3 days but did not find him. When they returned to Jericho, where he was staying, he said to them, "Didn't I tell you not to go?" The men of the city said to Elisha, "My Lord can see that even though the city's location is good, the water is bad and the land unfruitful." He replied, "Bring me a new bowl and put salt in it." After they had brought him one, Elisha went out to the spring, threw salt in it, and said, "This is what Yahweh says, I have healed this water. No longer will death or unfruitfulness result from it. Therefore, the water still remains healthy today, according to the word that Elisha spoke." From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking up the path, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, chanting, "Go up, Baldy! Go up, Baldy!" He turned around and looked at them and cursed them in the name of Yahweh. Then 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the children. From there, Elisha went to Mount Carmel, and then he returned to Samaria. And that is the reading of 2 Kings chapters 1 and 2. We pick up during the reign of King Ahaziah, and he is not well, the text tells us. He's not well. He has somehow fallen through a window of some sort in his upper room in Samaria, and he's been injured, and he wants to know what's going to happen to him. But instead of reaching out to Yahweh, The text says he reached out to Baal Zebub. Now, that means Lord of the Flies. What people think is going on here is that the author of Second Kings is actually sliding, like jabbing at this god whose name in Philistia, in Ekron, which is again a Philistine land state, Beelzebul. So that would mean Lord of the Princes. Well, just change a little bit, and he turns in Lord of the Flies. Why? Well, because he's useless. He's no good. So just a little bit of a knock there from the author against this Philistine god. But he wants to know from Baal-zebub whether or not, or Baal-zebul, whether or not he's going to recover. Yahweh obviously knows this is happening, so he sends an angel to Elijah and says, "Hey, why don't you go intercept these messengers and tell them to send a message back to Ahaziah from me instead. Let them know that are you looking for some help from Baal-zebul or Baal-zebub because there is no God in Israel? Do you have nobody to turn to in your homeland? What's going on here?" So they do. They end up taking that message back to Ahaziah. And he's like, "Why are you back so soon?" They gave him the answer from the prophets. And, the king doesn't like that very much. So he says, "Well, who gave you this message?" And they said, "It's a hairy man with a leather belt around his waist." And he knows, well, that is Elijah. And before I die, I'm going to get this man back. So he sends a captain of 50 men to Elijah, who's up on top of a hill. And the man says, "Hey," the king says, "come down." Elijah says, "Well, if I'm a man of God, if he's with me, then maybe fire from heaven will come down and consume you." And because he was a man of God, because God was with him, fire from heaven did come down and consume them. Whenever this guy gets back to Ahaziah, he sends a second captain of 50 men. And that captain is a bit more firm with Elijah than the first one, because he says, "Don't just come down, but come down immediately." He's more demanding of the prophet at this point. And Elijah goes through the same routine. If I'm a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume you. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. By the time the king sends the third man and his men, this captain has wised up some. And depending if this is all happening in pretty close sequence in a pretty short amount of time, he probably gets to the same hill and sees all these burn spots around him, where these bodies once were. Maybe he sees the bodies of ash all around him and is thinking, I might need to take a different tactic at this point. So he throws himself at the mercy of Elijah and says, "Please, if you consider me as having any sort of worth at all, please let my life be precious to you and don't call this fire down from heaven." And Elijah shows kindness, and he does so at the behest of the angel. The angel of Yahweh told Elijah to go on with him. Don't be afraid of him. So he gets down and he goes. So whenever Elijah gets to King Ahaziah, he speaks to him again, the exact same message he said before. "Is there no God in Israel that you could have talked to? Why is it that you're reaching out to Baal-zebub? So let you know, you're not going to get better. You're going to die." And of course, this is not surprising at all, because Ahaziah was an evil man. If you go back to the end of First Kings in chapter 22, we were told that he did. This is 1 Kings 22, verse 52. "He did what was evil in Yahweh's sight. He walked in the ways of his father and in the ways of his mother and in the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin. He served Baal and bowed in worship to him. And he anchored Yahweh God of Israel, just as his father had done." Well, you do what's wrong as he did, and you're probably going to suffer a pretty bitter end. And that's exactly what we see here within this text. That we're told that he has no son. So his brother Joram, or Jehoram, again, there's just a naming thing here, ends up becoming the king at this point. So we go from Ahaziah to Joram, and again, not from father to son, but from brother to brother. Joram is another son of Ahab. Well, picking up at chapter 2, then we come now to the end for Elijah, even though his end is very much different than that of Ahaziah and Ahab and all the other Israelite kings that he ministered under, we might say. Elijah and Elisha are traveling from Gilgal, and Elijah tells him, stay here. I've been told by Yahweh to go to Bethel. Elisha says, no, I'm going to go with you. I will not leave you. Shows commitment. Same thing happens 3 times, in fact, in verse, happens number 1 in verse 2, the second time in verse 4, the third time in verse 6. Each time they are followed by Elisha showing his commitment to Elijah that he's not going to abandon him. Now, a couple of times in between here, we see the sons of the prophets from these various places come to him, and somehow this event of Elijah being taken up into heaven was something that was revealed to them by Yahweh. So they're asking Elisha, do you know this is about to happen? And he responds twice, yes, I know this is about to happen. So it seems like there is some anticipation building to this particular event that somehow was known by all of these prophets, that for some reason Yahweh had revealed this to all of the prophets at this point. Once they get to the Jordan, Elijah takes off his mantle, which would be kind of his shawl type of garment, something that you would put over your shoulders and hang down off you. It was a symbol of God's power with him, with the prophet. He takes that off, smacks the water. Whenever it does, the water parts. They're able to pass across on dry ground. Elijah ends up asking Elisha a question. He asks him, tell me what I can do for you before I am taken away. Or I guess that's not really a question. It's, what can I do for you would be the question in the form of this. What can I do for you before I pass on? And Elisha says, please let me inherit 2 shares of your spirit. Okay, please let me inherit 2 shares of your spirit. This is not the idea of let me be doubly as prophetic as you are. That's not the idea here. The idea here instead is let me be your prophetic heir. This is very similar to the firstborn idea of a blessing. Basically, let me continue on in your ministry, in your prophetic ministry. Let me be your son. You have been like a father to me. Let me be your son. Let me carry on this ministry in your name. And Elijah, says, that's something difficult that you ask for. It's not for me to give, though. Elijah realizes it's not something that I can give you. This is God's decision. And if he allows you to see me go up into the heavens, then sure, yeah, he'll let you have that. But if he doesn't, then it must not be yours to have. So as they're continuing walking and talking, this chariot of fire with fire horses shows up. It separates Elijah from Elisha, and Elijah is taken up into heaven with the whirlwinds. And as Elisha is seeing this, he's crying out, my father, meaning, I am your son. The chariots and horsemen of Israel. Here is the symbol and power of Yahweh taking his servant up into the heavenly realm. So once he's gone, then Elisha takes hold of his own clothes and he tears them, because again, even though this is a blessing for Elijah, it's still rough for your mentor, someone you view as a father, to be gone now. So he tears his clothes, but he picks up the mantle and he goes back to the bank and he hits the water and he cries out, where is Yahweh, God of Israel? Is he here with me? And he strikes the water again, and the water parts. And the people who were there were sons of the prophet who were observing this. They proclaim that the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. So he has taken over this prophetic ministry for Elijah. He is now Yahweh's prophet. They come and they bow down before him. But some of those who are here, they see what has taken place. And they're like, hey, Elisha, can we go search, in the nearby mountains and in the valleys to find Elijah? Maybe the spirit just took him away to one of these places. And Elisha's like, no, that's not what happened. But they keep begging him, to the point of embarrassment. And he's like, fine, go. So they go look for 3 days. They get back and they say, hey, well, we couldn't find him. And Elisha's like, yeah, I told you not to go, because he's not going to be found here. He is somewhere else entirely. he goes on from this place to, I guess it would be at this point. Let's see here. I think he's in Jericho at this point. I think that's right. Let's back up here. The men of the city, verse 19. Let's see. I think Jericho is the last place that they were together. Let's back up and find out here. Let's see. To the Jordan, to Jericho. So they went to Jericho. Then he sends to the Jordan. I guess it's in Jericho. I guess this is the place that is being identified here. The men of the city. I'm assuming it's Jericho. I could be wrong about that. If I'm wrong about that, put that in the comment section below. But they tell Elisha that this location is good, but that the springs, they're not good. That the water's bad, the land is unfruitful, and Elisha says, well, bring me a new bowl and put some salt in it. When he does so, he shows compassion and mercy to the city. Elisha went out to the spring with this bowl, with the salt, throws the salt in the water, and says, this is what Yahweh says, I have healed this water. No longer will death or unfruitfulness result from it. Therefore, the water still remains healthy today, according to the word that Elisha spoke. Why do this? Well, one, I think it is just to show compassion and mercy towards his fellow man, or towards his countrymen, but also to show that, yes, the power has passed on from Elijah to Elisha. Well, at this point, Elisha is now going to head up to Bethel. And as he's walking up to Bethel, we have one of the strangest scenes in all the scripture. The CSB says some small boys. The term that is used here is a term that could describe, a pretty wide range of age groups. It could mean small boys. It could mean teenagers. It could even mean something along the lines of young men. Boaz's servants in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 5 were mature men, and they were referred to with this particular term. The CSB has used in its mind the context to determine that these are young boys. It says their reason for this is the behavior of the group suggests they were young. In all likelihood, the children were preteens or young teens, which they're just taking the context in their translation. They are interpreting who they believe this group of boys to be, again, whatever age group they are. But what are they chanting? They're chanting, well, go up, Baldy, go up, Baldy. I've heard for a long time that the issue here is that he's calling them bald. But I think more so it's not about that. I think we have to consider who is in this scenario. Number one, he's going up to Bethel. What is at Bethel? Bethel is one of the paganistic worship centers. So these people who are coming out, these young people, again, however old their age is, they are seeing that this prophet, who is probably going to come speak against them, so they're telling him, hey, leave us alone, go up like Elijah, go up, get out of here, disappear like he did. I think that's what's taking place here. I think they are mocking Elisha's ministry, and they are telling him to, just get out, go away. We don't want you here. So with that, I think being the understanding, it's not about the baldy thing. I think they're calling him baldy just because he's not as hairy as Elijah seems to have been. But with this mocking of the ministry, that's why he turns to them and curses them in the name of Yahweh, because that's really who they're mocking, is they're mocking Yahweh. After this happens, the text says that 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the children. Again, children is their interpretation of this particular Hebrew word. But I will note that this word for mauled doesn't necessarily mean killed. It literally means cut up. So it's not necessarily that these 42 individuals were killed here in this moment. They could have just been beat up a great deal and learned a really important lesson as to why you don't mock Yahweh's prophets, why you don't mock the ministry, why you don't mock the work that they're doing in the name of Yahweh, especially from the perspective of paganism. Again, he's probably going up there to say something against their practices. He spent Elijah and Elisha both are going to spend the majority of their time prophesying to the northern tribes, telling them they need to return. They need to do better. And who really likes being told that? Well, not very many people, I do not believe. So I think that's what's going on here. They're mocking the ministry. They're mocking Elisha. They're mocking Elijah. They're mocking Yahweh. And for that, they are going to get a very strong reminder of this is not something that you do. And that concludes what we see here in chapters 1 and 2. From there, Elisha goes up to Mount Carmel, and then he ends up returning to Samaria. If you have any questions or comments about this text, about these two chapters, 1 and 2, please feel free to leave that in the comments section below. I do appreciate you taking some time to read along with me on this Monday. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading together from 2 Kings chapter 3. Hope to see you then. Take care, and God bless.